We're now ready to begin our fourth session for today. The fourth session is about Singapore's water story. The presenter will be Mr. Khoo Ting Chai. The respondent will be Ambassador Bahan Gafo, and the moderator will be Mr. Chu Man Leong. May I now invite the three of them to come out on stage. Thank you.
Very good afternoon. You know, the Singapore story has always been inextricably linked to the water story. Right for independence, everybody know, because of scarcity, water has been an issue of life and death for Singapore. When we were trusted out of the Malaysian Union, Singapore was, of course, almost dependent on import water from Malaysia, based on two water agreements in 61 and 62. And those two agreements were actually codified into our separation agreement lodged in the United Nations. Decades after, our dependence on water from Malaysia, somewhat shaped the relationship between the two countries. I think it also shaped our national psyche and kept Mr. Lee Kuan Yew and his cabinet very much obsessed over the subject of water. I think today, Singapore's water policies and management system has been on many fronts successful. I think good governance, good management are doubtless important factors here. But water also has quite a unique political position here in Singapore. And of course, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, without much saying here, has been very much at the heart of the water story. He gave a very clear vision of water security, backing up with political will and commitment of talent and resource to build the water system. And in some sense, he compelled change in this respect. So looking back, later you'll hear that the Singapore water story has actually moved Singapore from a position of vulnerability to one of confidence, strength, and opportunity. Of course, I think the big question is, going forward, where would the water story bring Singapore? I think that will be the theme and focus of this session here this afternoon. I'm Chu Man Leong. I'm the current Chief Executive of PUB. Happy to be a moderator for this session. With me, I have Mr. Khoo Ting Chai, who really does not need any further introduction. He's been with you for the last few days. He has been my predecessor in PUB, having helmed the organization very successfully for 8 years. And of course, as a speaker, he will illuminate on our water story up to the present day. I also have with me Ambassador Bahan Gafo, currently Singapore's chief negotiator for climate change. I think he brings with him a whole wealth of experience in foreign affairs, having served in various policy planning directorates, and also being ambassador to France and Portugal. So, without much ado, Ting Chai, please. Thanks.
Good afternoon again. The water story is a fairly well-known one, and the role played by Mr. Lee Kuan Yew is really legendary. I really did not work very closely directly with him, had some encounters, but so I'm not sure I'm the most qualified to speak on this subject. But having spent 8 years in PUB, I guess I have some sense of his role in this very important story. And that's why I guess Heng Chi assigned me to talk on water. Water, everybody knows, is a critical resource for Singapore, even though we get ample rainfall, 2.4 meters a year. But our big problem is that we don't have the land to collect and store all this rain. We don't have any other natural sources of water, no known groundwater sources, although now PUB is trying to see whether we could have some alternative deep groundwater sources. But our water problem started even during the British days, who surrendered to the Japanese when the Japanese forces took McRitchie Reservoir, as the British knew then that they had only less than 48 hours left of water. So when we gained our independence in 1965, the survival of Singapore depended much on our ability to have an assured supply of water. And Mr. Lee Kuan Yew made this a top priority, and he took strategic as well as practical steps to tackle the problem. I think it is best that you hear from him directly, so I've invited him to join us. Well, I'm playing a video of him, short introduction that he gave in 2008 at the inaugural award of the Lee Kuan Yew Water Prize at the very first Singapore International Water Week. It's just a short clip, but I think you will enjoy this. Okay. Anyway, there are several thousand international delegates who had SIWW, the International Water Week, who were present, and many of them were the world's top leaders and experts in water. And I think they were all completely bowled over by not just his vision, but his grasp of the details. So we are lucky because in most cities and countries in the world, water remains a very serious problem. And the lack of leadership and good governance is one of the main reasons why these problems remain. So we are proud that many now look at Singapore as a model, and which makes our water industry and the Singapore International Water Week now one of the top events in the world's water industry, which keeps PUB very busy and creates many business opportunities for our companies. Mr. Lee Kuan Yew set the vision and the goals. Trying to harvest every drop of rain became the goal of the PUB, which pioneered urban harvesting on a large scale. You know, people talk about urban stormwater harvesting and little bits and pieces here and there, but there's no city in the world, there's no country in the world that does urban stormwater harvesting on the scale that Singapore does. And this started with our experiments with the Bedok Reservoir in the late 70s. So today, 2/3 of Singapore is a water catchment, with the rainwater being collected in 17 reservoirs, including the Marina Reservoir, which, as Mr. Lee said, collects water from the Singapore and Kallang River and from the Central Business District, including Orchard Road, with the building of the Marina Barrage. But collecting water from all these urban areas is only possible not on the individual efforts of one agency, but only with an integrated approach. There's these agencies working together in land use planning, environmental management, and making sure that the catchments are clean and separating the stormwater drains from the sewage network. So the rivers have to be cleaned up. That's the easy part. But really, the difficult part is tackling the sources of pollution on the land. And that's where all the regulations on land use and environmental management had to come in, clearing the pig and duck farms, the backyard factories, and the shipyards. So Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, as he mentioned, he set a 10-year target from 1977 to 1987 to clean up the rivers. And he gave an incentive. He said that I will give gold medals to the people who will accomplish this task on target, and he kept to his promise. And 10 civil servants, including the current chairman of PUB, Mr. Lee Ek Tiang, and a few others, they each got a gold medal when the cleanup was completed in 1987. And at the presentation ceremony in 1987, he predicted that, as he said in the video, that technology will make it possible for us to dam up the Singapore and Kallang rivers and create a freshwater reservoir in the heart of the city. 20 years on, the Marina Barrage is now a reality. So the holistic approach to managing water and creating the infrastructure to collect rainwater and use water separately meant that Singapore, being 100% sewered, was ready for large-scale recycling of water using membrane technology when that became possible. So today we have new water. Now, new water is not just about technology. We would not have been able to produce new water if we had not set about separating our stormwater and sewage network so that we collected the used water of the sewage separately on a large scale. And that made it possible for us to create new water. I remember once I briefed one of the former ministers of water from Malaysia, and I told him how we produce new water, and he said that it will be very, very difficult for us to do that in Malaysia, and I think that applies to many other developing countries, simply because their catchments have not been properly managed. Sewage systems have not been put in. So if you do not have separation of stormwater and sewage, it is not possible for you to recycle water on a large scale. So it's not just about technology, but also about an integrated approach to management. And in addition, now we have desalination produced efficiently and at comparatively low cost. So the water loop, as PUB likes to say, has been closed. we now have the capacity to sustain our growth without being dependent on imported water. In fact, this evening, the Prime Minister will be opening our second desalination plant in Tuas, which will have more than double the capacity of the current Seoul desalination plant. So, but integrated water management is not just about supply. I think he also focused on water conservation, on demand management through campaigns to encourage people to save water, industries to save water, introduce legislation to use water-saving devices in the home and in commercial buildings, and to price water correctly at the full economic cost, a policy that was later pushed very hard also by then DPM Lee Hsien Loong. And this integrated approach, it might seem obvious and straightforward, but it's almost unique in any city in the world, and it won PUB the Stockholm Water Prize in 2007. But beyond managing water as a resource, PUB now sees water as part of the larger urban system. Water is now managed as an environmental asset, as something that will help to improve our dense urban landscape. This blue map of Singapore shows all our 17 reservoirs, 32 rivers, and 8,000 kilometers of drains and canals. It's blue, but mostly right now the blue is still not visible because most of the rivers are canals, very often concrete canals, huge concrete monsoon drains, not very good to look at. So PUB's Active, Beautiful and Clean Waters program, or the ABC Waters program, envisage projects that will gradually make this blue a reality with the renaturalizing of the waterways, like what has been done in Bishan Park. You can see that what used to be a concrete canal has now been turned into a meandering river in the park. Punggol Waterway also in Punggol New Town links two reservoirs together. So in the same way that he strongly supported the greening of Singapore that you heard about earlier, Ms. Lee Kuan Yew likewise endorsed the ABC Waters program. And when he visited the ABC Waters exhibition in February 2007, he told PUB it's a good initiative as it will enhance property values and hence be supported by the people. So indeed, PUB's goal in the ABC Waters program is to bring water closer to the people and to encourage them to be joint stakeholders and to help take care of our water resources through community engagement projects involving especially school children. Beyond that, our significant investment in water technologies to tackle our water problems has spawned a water industry, which was given a boost in 2006 by the National Research Foundation, which allocated $330 million to fund water research. So the water industry has now become a strategic growth industry for Singapore, with more than 130 companies now forming the water cluster. So Singapore has become a bit of a hub for water. So at the talk, Mr. Lee said that we didn't do this by ourselves. We climbed on other people's shoulders. We brought things together and improved on them. We are happy to have people climb on our shoulders. It's a collaborative effort. So the world will need this because what we have assumed was a limitless, endless supply of water was not so. In essence, the water story is not dissimilar to what we have heard earlier this morning, urban planning, housing, or greening. We were a kind of a basket case of urbanization in the 50s and 60s with all sorts of urbanization problems. But over the space of 50 years, we've become one of the more livable and sustainable cities in Asia, if not the world. So our mission at the Centre for Liveable Cities is really to try and document what we have done, distill some of the principles so that we can share them with the next generation of Singaporeans who are going to be our urban leaders, as well as with other city leaders who will be interested in creating livable and sustainable cities. If you look at this matrix, which I think Mr. Liu also showed, we are one of the few cities in the world that is an example of high density and a highly livable city. Most of the livable cities in the world ranked by indices like Mercer tend to be cities like Melbourne and Vancouver, which are low density and somewhat sprawling. And I think the future cities, the cities in future from the developing world, China, India, Africa, and Latin America, are less likely to be like Melbourne and Vancouver, and probably closer to what Singapore is. So I think what we have done, there is some value for other cities. So we've tried to kind of distill the lessons into a framework which we call the CLC, Livability Framework. And these principles, which really is about trying to achieve livability outcomes, high quality of life, competitive economy, a sustainable environment, but sustaining these outcomes on a continuing basis are two important factors: integrated planning and development, our integrated approach, and probably most importantly, having good or dynamic urban governance. So to conclude, I will quote from an interview that CLC had with Mr. Lee Kuan Yew not so long ago. The interview was conducted by Mr. Liu Taiker, actually. And when we asked him about the critical success factors for Singapore, he spelled out 3 critical governance factors for Singapore. First, you must have an efficient administration, cannot be one-off. It has to be regularly done, and there must be an organization or several organizations that sees to this. Second, it must be a level playing field for all. You must have a society that people believe is fair. We have a heterogeneous population, Chinese, Malays, Indians, and others, so policy has to be colorblind. And third, it must be corruption-free. The basis for that was a non-corrupt bureaucracy, especially the police, heavy penalties for corruption, rigorous enforcement of the law, and today people accept it as a fact. You've got to obey the law in Singapore. So what does the future hold? I think our challenges continue because our resources, land especially, continue to be limited. So as we continue to grow and urbanize, we face challenge like climate change, which brings about new uncertainties in weather patterns and rising sea levels. So that, I think, is a challenge of Mr. Chew Men Leong and the current team at the PUB, and I'm sure they will, no doubt, rise to the occasion with the legacy that Mr. Lee has left behind to take a very holistic approach to tackling the water problem so that the water story will continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Teng Chai. We'll now invite Berhan to respond. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm afraid I don't have any videos to show you. I don't have any slides to show you, but the good news is that I will be brief. I think it was quite fitting that we began with a presentation from Khoo Teng Chai, who has enormous experience in this field. He has provided a good framework for our discussions. I want to build on his presentation, but I also want to try and push the boundaries a little. So I'd like to conclude my remarks by identifying some challenges for the Singapore water story. But let me start by saying that the Singapore water story is a truly remarkable story. It's a truly excellent example of how we have transitioned from the third world to the first world in one generation. What is even more remarkable about the Singapore water story is that it's a global success story. I think by almost every global benchmark, Singapore is recognized as a leader when it comes to water resources management and water technology. Asit Biswas, some of you may know him, an internationally respected scholar on water management issues, wrote in one of his recent books, which is quite aptly titled The Singapore Water Story, and he said, let me quote, "Singapore has constructed one of the best public policy laboratories in the world in terms of water resources management," unquote. Now, at the inaugural Singapore International Water Week in 2008, the former president of the International Water Association, David Garman, said that there are 3 aspects to Singapore's water management which makes us quite outstanding. And the 3 factors he identified are the willingness to invest in new infrastructure, the willingness to deploy new technology, and the role of public-private partnerships. These have remained, in my view, constant ingredients in the Singapore water story, but there are also other ingredients that Koo Teng Chai alluded to in his presentation, like an integrated approach that combines both urban planning and water management and a holistic approach to water management issues. Now, my sense is that the achievements of Singapore are often taken for granted, especially by Singaporeans. But if you look at the status or the state of water issues globally, the contrast between what we have here, what we are fortunate to have here in Singapore, contrast is quite stark. In many parts of the world, I think there is a daily struggle even to get access to clean water. And let me just cite you some statistics to make the point. According to the UNDP, 1 billion people still in the developing world do not have access to clean water. 2 billion people do not have access to basic sanitation. And every year, almost 2 million children die because of diseases related to sanitation and unclean water. So based on these indicators, and in fact I would say by almost any indicators, Singapore has done exceedingly well. And we have to recognize that even as we try and push the boundaries domestically, we have to recognize that globally we have done well. Now globally, the discourse or the narrative is also shifting from survival issues to subsistence-related issues to sustainability issues. So water and sustainability has become a very dominant theme in the international arena, and the whole nexus between water and energy, the theme of water and urbanization, water and an aging population have become very, very predominant drivers for the water community around the world. And many of these issues, by the way, have been discussed at the Singapore International Water Week. Now, at the Davos meeting, the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos early this year, experts from around the world looked at the global risks that face businesses. And you would be surprised that 4 of the top global risks identified by experts around the world is water scarcity. The other 3 risks, there are a whole host of risks, but the other 3 top risks, incidentally, are related to climate change, increasing greenhouse gases emission, and failure to adapt to climate change. And the one non-climate change related risk is the chronic fiscal imbalances in many countries. So it is no surprise that water scarcity issues and water sustainability issues have become huge global issues. And as I listened to Mr. Lee's video, I think it struck me how visionary he has been, even in terms of sustainability issues, the kind of issues that we are just beginning to grapple with globally. But as I said, I wanted to push the boundaries a little, because when a country like Singapore, we are quite well ahead of the curve when it comes to water issues. And when one is ahead of the curve, the greatest challenge is complacency. The greatest challenge is staying ahead, keeping ahead. But I think there are some challenges that we face. In fact, Teng Chai alluded to them. And I wanted to identify 3 such challenges. One has to do with water and climate change. Second has to do with managing demand for water. And the third has to do with managing the whole relationship between water and energy. And let me elaborate on these 3 challenges. Now, it's a reality that climate change is going to make water even more scarce than it already is. And the biggest consequences of climate change are going to be transmitted through changes in the water cycle, through changes in rainfall, through changes in temperature. And higher temperature means higher evaporation rate, which means less water in the reservoirs. In other words, water is going to be the medium through which climate change will express itself, especially in many cities, coastal cities like Singapore. Now, in Singapore, the annual mean surface temperature has risen by almost 1 degree Celsius since 1948, and our sea levels in the Straits of Singapore has been increasing by 3 millimeter for the last 15 years. And rainfall activity, as you know, has become more unpredictable, has become more intense, has become more volatile. So the longer term trend is quite clear, both globally and regionally. We have to be prepared for extreme weather patterns. And against this background, the question is this: how do we in Singapore protect our water resources and water infrastructure from the risks of climate change? And I wanted to identify two specific risks related to climate change. One is the whole issue of saltwater intrusion into our water resources. Almost half of our 17 reservoirs adjoin or are contiguous to the sea. And the whole question of saltwater intrusion, in my view, is a big challenge that many countries are facing, even in the Netherlands. Saltwater intrusion as a result of rising sea level, as a result of tidal surges, and in the case of some countries, as a result of increasing salinity in the groundwater. Now, we may not be dependent on groundwater, but I think saltwater intrusion, in my view, is a big challenge, especially if it's aggravated by tidal surges and increasing sea level rises. The second challenge with regard to climate change is the whole challenge of managing extreme weather events in the form of very intense rain and prolonged drought. In fact, in my view, a persistent drought and persistent and prolonged drought would be an even greater challenge than managing flash floods, because the whole infrastructure has to be designed not just to manage the runoff from an intense rainfall, but also to be prepared for prolonged periods of drought in terms of creating surplus capacity that will ensure that we do not have ruptures in our supply. In fact, I would say that if you look at the water supply or water story of Singapore, the fact that we have not had any supply crunch, in spite of tremendous growth over the last few decades, in spite of an expanding population, is actually credit to how we have managed to avoid a supply crunch. I've been flashed a sign that says time's up. Managing demand for water, very quickly, Khoo Teng Chai pointed this out, but I think it's one strategy to make supply robust, but I think that strategy will only work if we also make demand sustainable. Because no matter how robust we make the supply, we need a demand management strategy. Now, in terms of managing demand, I have a few observations. First, I think we need a renewed emphasis on conservation. I think we need to instill greater social responsibility in terms of how we consume water. My sense is that PUB has done such an excellent job that many, many Singaporeans take water supply for granted. I think an earlier generation of Singaporeans grew up with a conservation mindset, and I think we have lost this conservation instinct, and we need to start addressing this now and change this mindset as we move forward. Singapore's daily per capita water consumption has come down from 165 litres to 152 litres in 2011. And this is a good achievement, but I think there's no reason why we should not achieve for even better targets, going for as low as 130 or 100 litres, which is the norm for some European cities. Our target as it stands is 140 litres per capita daily by 2030. I think it's a conservative target. I think we need to be ambitious on that score. Second major challenge when it comes to demand management is managing non-domestic or industrial consumption of water. Today in Singapore, 45% of water is consumed by the domestic sector, which means 55% by the non-domestic or industrial sector. And in 2060, 70% is going to be consumed by the non-domestic or industrial sector. So the key to demand management is going to be how we manage demand from non-domestic or industrial sector. And I think we really have to push businesses to be serious about water issues, because as I said earlier, for businesses, scarcity of water is also a business risk. And we probably need a combination of a carrot and stick approach, regulation, legislation, to promote, incentivize efficiency, but also to penalize inefficient use of water. Now, globally, the trend is towards increasing consumption of water by industry, which has been rising faster than the rate of population. Globally, the real consumer of water is agriculture, which is 70%, which consumes 70% of global freshwater supply. Fortunately, we don't have an agricultural sector in Singapore, but still, for us, the challenge, in my view, is to manage consumption by the non-domestic sector. The third related question of demand management is pricing. Because in any equation of supply and demand, you have to manage pricing. Now, the fact is that we have not changed water tariffs since the year 2000. And during the same period, we have changed electricity tariffs. Electricity tariffs have increased significantly in the same period. We do have a water conservation tax, but the question is, has that really deterred inefficient use and overconsumption of water? My own sense is that we probably would need to start looking at tiered structures for water tariffs, with the principle that the more you use, the more you will pay for an additional unit of water. That has to be a solution longer term, because ultimately price has to be an instrument in terms of managing consumption of water, especially in the context of rising energy cost. Now, the third challenge that I identified was the water and energy nexus. I think this is a huge issue internationally, because there is a clear synergy or symbiosis between water and energy use. And for Singapore, both resources are very precious, energy and water. But the question and the challenge for Singapore is, how do we integrate energy and water issues in the policy-making process? Right now, we have two separate agencies or structures that looks at water and energy issues. But looking forward, going forward, I think the existing structures have worked very well for Singapore. But looking forward, I think we need to start planning in a more integrated, holistic manner that looks at both energy and water issues in an integrated manner, because we need to optimize the nexus between energy and water. And let me give you an example of what I mean by this nexus. The second desalination plant that is going to be opened this evening by Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong is an example of what I think is a symbiotic co-location between a desalination plant and a power plant. And what is interesting about this plant is that this came about, this co-location between a power plant and a desalination plant came about as a result of commercial decision, not government directive. But what does this mean for the future is that the government agencies and policy planners need to be thinking more proactively in terms of managing this nexus, because ultimately we want to ensure that any heat generated in the power industry is harnessed and used for the purposes of desalination, as well as avoiding wasteful use of energy by the water sector. Let me conclude by saying that the three challenges that I have identified are not new ones. I think PUB and our water officials and our water community are fully aware of them. These issues have come up. If you look at PUB's latest document, which is entitled Our Water, Our Future, they have begun already projecting 50 years forward. I think the challenges are well known, but how we deal with these challenges will determine the next chapter of the next Singapore water story. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I think we have heard really how the water story has turned what is essentially a strategic vulnerability into strength and confidence into opportunity. And I have to say that going forward, although we have achieved significant success, there's really no room for complacency, as Abah has put it. I would like to take this opportunity to basically open the floor for comments and questions. Yes, Professor Tommy?
I'd like to put one question to Teng Chai and one to Berhan. I asked Teng Chai to forgive me in advance if my question makes you uncomfortable. This morning when Liu Taiker spoke to us, he said that in our transition from third world to the first, we had resolved many of the challenges normally associated with third world cities. And one of these problems is flooding. I hope you don't mind my asking you this question. Well, 48 years after 1965, we still get flooding. So my question is the problem of flooding intrinsically not solvable? And if it is solvable, why have we not solved it? My question to Berhan is that our transition to first world status carries both privilege and responsibility. We want to be a responsible global citizen. We want to share our knowledge and expertise with the international community. We have done so well in water and in sanitation. I don't know whether you know that because of Singapore leadership, the UN has adopted a resolution in which one day a year would be known as that World Toilet Day. And it will be celebrated next week in New York. So my question to Berhan is it not possible for Singapore to share with the third world our knowledge and experience in both the water sector and in the sanitation sector?
Thank you for asking the question. Actually, I happen to be trained in civil engineering, so I guess I know a little bit from my training about drainage and flood. So it's important, I guess. It's one of those things that's difficult to explain. But we were very glad when we had the flash floods in Orchard Road and the media went crazy about Orchard River. That subsequently, Minister Mentor Lee Kuan Yew in a way came to PUB's defense when he said no amount of engineering can solve the kind of floods that you're going to have. And in a way, he's right, because it's always about trade-off. It's just like greening. You would like Singapore to be as green as possible, but there's a trade-off because you need the land also for housing and other purposes. And how do you resolve that trade-off is very often a very, very difficult issue. So when it comes to planning for a flood, our engineers have had to grapple. We are a tropical country, so we get lots of rain and we get lots of intense rainfall. So our drains have been designed for a certain intensity of rainfall. And that has stood us well over the years. In fact, PUB has this chart that shows that even though as we urbanize progressively over the years, the incidence of flooding has actually drastically been reduced. It was 3,000 over hectares 30, 40 years ago, and now it's barely, less than 100 hectares or something, especially with the marina, 30 plus, right? He was just telling me. But, with climate change and with changing weather patterns, I think it's very difficult to now design what used to be an intensity that doesn't happen so often, now seems to happen more often. And when you talk to the climate experts or the weather experts, they cannot give you a clear answer because this kind of things needs many years to play out before you can scientifically or statistically conclude that the weather pattern has changed. But nevertheless, I think there seems to be enough evidence over the last 4 or 5 years that things have probably changed. So much so that I think PUB, without waiting for really the final, conclusion from scientists, have already taken certain decisions to try and minimize the risk of flooding in Singapore. I mean, one of them is actually, we've always reclaimed our land to be quite high, above 1.25 meters above the highest high tide level. And that's why you notice in the flash floods, a lot of them are not in the HDB towns, because the HDB towns are built primarily on land that has been raised or reclaimed. And in fact, a couple of years ago, we decided that any new reclamation the land will be raised by a further 1 meter. There's cost involved. I mean, the reclamation agencies, the development agencies like HDB, JTC are not very happy about that. But that's the kind of decision you have to make. There's some cost. Orchard Road, I think Mendiong can probably tell you more, but to solve not so much to solve as to try and prevent the risk of Orchard Road flooding again by designing for a higher rainfall intensity means that we have to invest quite a lot of money, probably $1 billion or $2 billion, I don't know, to create some retention ponds upstream or to divert the flow into the Singapore River. So the technical solutions are there, but there are trade-offs involved. There's cost. And I think that's something that I guess sometimes it's a little bit to explain to the public, but I'm sure PUB under Mendyong's leadership is doing his best. I hope I've answered your question.
You just parried the question over to me, but I just want to add on a few comments here. I think PUB recognizes that the situation has evolved. The rainfall intensity has increased, and therefore we are taking all measures to see how we can actually expand our drainage system, work on the pathways, also figure out how to control runoff, and also help buildings to protect themselves as an overall package to basically better mitigate against occurrence of flash floods and actually increase our resilience. But ultimately, I think we do have to recognize, given the land constraints, it is not possible for us to eliminate flash floods completely, because nature is a powerful force. We have to recognize that given the land constraints that we have, we can only build our capability up to a certain level of capacity. But I also want to just bring attention to the point that Berhan has mentioned. I think impact climate change, I think, is something we should be concerned about. It's extremity of weather that we are concerned about. There's flash floods we have to be concerned. But I think even more critical is how we're going to prepare ourselves for the other extreme, prolonged droughts. Yeah, I think this is something we have to continue to work on for the long term. Now I hand over to Berhan to basically answer the other question.
Well, I mean, just to pick up on that very last point, I think extreme weather events means volatility in terms of demand and supply. And in that context, I think demand management, in my view, becomes even more critical than before. Because I think if we don't reduce our consumption, both in the household and the non-domestic sector, then we are going to be in deeper challenge than what we are already facing now. Ambassador Koh, with regard to your question to me, the answer simply is yes. I think we have a lot to share, and we should share in terms of what we have done in terms of managing our water as well as sanitation. Now, there are two specific examples of areas where I think we are already planning to contribute or contributing. One is that in New York, there is an ongoing discussion about sustainable development goals as a follow-up to the Rio +20 conference in Rio. And there is a whole discussion about identifying water and water scarcity, water management as an issue and objective in itself. We see the value of that, and we will use that discussion as a way of sharing our expertise with our friends and partners in the international community. Second is the Singapore International Water Week. I think it was Teng Chai who mentioned it. I think it has really become a very important international conference and platform for the water community from around the world. So what we have been doing in, for example, in the Foreign Ministry, is to use that platform to co-locate certain other events. So at the last edition of the Singapore International Water Week, we invited some of our friends from the small island developing states to Singapore during the conference so that they could participate in the conference, but also custom designing some courses and training programs for them. I think we can do more of that. We certainly want to do that. But I think the other thing that we can share is that water issue is not just a water issue. I think the Singapore experience shows that water issues can be handled successfully only if it is treated in a holistic and integrated manner. So to share our experience in water per se sometimes is of no value in my view. I think we have to tell people and share with people our experience in terms of how we managed it in terms of land use planning, city planning, urban planning, and the whole notion of cities. Again, I think the Centre for Liveable Cities has been very active in that area, and as MFA we've been working with the CLC to also share our experiences in terms of sustainably managing a city in which water is an important pillar.
I think I've been reminded that I think we are going to run out of time. So we have two questions One from the middle table there.
I'd like
Yeah,
to,
thanks. Go ahead.
don't mind my sitting down. I'd like to follow through Ambassador Kufuor's suggestion about looking at not only at water as a single issue, but environmental sustainability as a more comprehensive issue. Now, not only should you just look at water, electricity, maybe you should also look at recycling of waste, which in Singapore is very far behind many other countries. So, because these are all interrelated of environmental sustainability, if there is one agency comprehensively looking at this and coordinate this, that will perhaps have a more effective way of dealing with this problem. The second point, I would like to also support the idea of not only you can satisfy the supply, but you should also look at demand. The demand formula had not been polished up in Singapore. Had been there for some time, and it was just moving around a little bit. I think we should take seriously the idea of the supply and what cost, who pays for this. As much as water, you talk about electricity, you talk about recycling. And that make the whole package of environmental sustainability more meaningful.
Thank you very much. I think your points are very well noted. I think there's another question from behind, Gaimin.
To have to ask another question. But I just want to follow up on Ambassador Gaffo's comments and also Professor Tomiko's question. I'm very glad, Ambassador, that you addressed the water energy nexus. Can I just bring up another nexus which I think is very important for Singapore, especially in relation to both too much and too little water, and sometimes at the same time, which Koo Ting Chai and Chu Man Long have mentioned. And this is the water-forest nexus. And I'm not fronted by Tan Wee Kiat. Of course, for a long time, Singapore has had water from our central catchment area. And we know that forests do the ecosystem services. Forests conserve water and discharge it in you don't get flash floods in good, well-managed forests. So, I mean, I don't want to carry on too long about that, but I just want to remind you about what the Minister Mentor said, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew said, that no amount of engineering can solve the flood problem. But I think if we look more at nature-based solutions, it would go a long way. So can I suggest that PUB not just look at engineering solutions per se, but look at nature? I'm very glad to see that you are renaturalizing canals. This is something that my society had been saying for a long time, since the 80s, that you should keep the natural border, but you know, there are other reasons. There's unhygienic, breeds mosquitoes, this and that. But now you're doing it, and I think we should look at forests as a reservoir to naturally store and discharge water in a more regulated way than some of your other engineering solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think your point is also very well noted. I think we only have time for one absolutely last question over there. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to add a point because I work in forests and have worked in forests for the last 6 years. So just a new announcement. We've been working with OLAM, and we are protecting in Congo 100,000 hectares that was just validated and verified. So generating 4.9 million carbon credits over 30 years with 5,000 gorillas. So Singaporean businesses, I'm a Singaporean-based company, we also just won the sustainability reporting for Twitter, which is just IPOing now. So there is a really interesting precedent where HiFlux, a number of Singaporean companies are doing fantastic work abroad, tying in with the forest work. But I guess my question is, does PUB have a strategy to internationalize some of its successes? Everywhere I go in Africa, in America, people always refer to Singapore as such a successful case study, particularly around water. So I think there's a huge opportunity for that type of expansion. Thank you.
Thank you. In direct response to the question we have been doing this, facilitating, catalyzing the growth of the water industry, which has not only served the Singapore market, but actually has gone out to the region and the world. At the same time, through our international platform like Singapore International Water Week, we have brought the world here to basically discuss about challenges as far as water is concerned, and talk about how we can co-create innovative solutions to water challenges. Okay, I think with that, I would like to put a conclusion to this session. Thank you very much for your comments and questions, and would like to take the opportunity to also thank the speaker and also respondent on this issue, which, of course, we continue to be obsessed with. Thank you.